Díoghaibh go léir a cóide agus tá fáilte ród. Welcome to be my guest with me, Mary Honan, on LíR Media TV, supporting the Samaritans, Limerick and Tipperary, Clare's Wish Foundation in Limerick, and Deel Animal Rescue in West Limerick. And my very special guest today, I'm honoured to have on the show, is Professor Amanda Phelan, who works in Trinity College, but Amanda's research is focused, her primary research is focused on safeguarding older people and older people care. And she's undertaken work related to child welfare and protection and domestic violence. And she has been involved in research groups related to missed care, community nursing, and person-centered care. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Hi, how are you? Lovely to meet you and your viewers.
Do you know something, Amanda? I was saying to you off camera, you're working in Trinity College, and it's just the day I walked in there for a course, well, it was a weekend event, your breath was taken away. It's not big, but it's just this kind of enriching feeling you get, and you feel you're being lifted up when you walk in and you just look at the building. Everything seems to be in a square, and yes, that's it, you know, and it's powerful impact when you walk in there.
No, it's a lovely building. Our School of Nursing and Midwifery is actually in Deel Street.
Oh, and right.
That building is equally as pretty. It's the old gas building.
Oh, yeah.
The architecture is based on Tutankhamun. So there's a lot of marble and stuff inside, so it's quite interesting. But going into Trinity, I mean, it's a huge tourist attraction,
isn't it?
But Cork, UCC is lovely as well.
UCC is amazing. Yeah, do you know, I love Mary Immaculate here in Limerick, and I don't know whether it's that it reminds me, evokes memories of primary school, you know, that religious kind of feeling. Some people would turn away from that. I find it very welcoming. The whole place is kind of like small. And that's what I think I like about Trinity is it doesn't look vast. It all looks contained within a square, but yet your eye is just brought up all the time to it's just the history, I suppose, of Trinity. But Amanda, how did you get involved? I know that you were involved in nursing and midwifery, as we said. What made you go down the road of academia and study for a PhD, which is a difficult process in itself?
Well, it certainly is. I suppose really it was always looking at what else you could do, because I started off in nursing. I'm from Ballinasloe, County Galway, so I did nursing in Portiuncula. Then I went to London and did midwifery. Completely culture shock, because, you know, Ballinasloe would have been a small town and I landed in London.
Did you like London?
It was lovely and a great experience, but after the 2.5 years, I had enough of it.
Yeah,
it was so.
A Ballinasloe girl at heart.
Ballinasloe, yes, and then I did public health, so that was in UCD, and then as a public health nurse, I just kind of kept hitting away. I did a degree, a master's, and PhD. And when I was in my second year of my master's, I got an academic post in UCD. Now I wouldn't get it, because it would be unheard of someone still doing a master's getting an academic post. But at that time, there weren't many people who were going on to do masters or PhDs in public health nursing, and they needed somebody to
right place at the right time.
So yeah, so that progressed, and I moved to Trinity in March of last year, which was interesting because I was 5 days there and the whole thing closed down. So we're still just starting to reintegration. The good thing about Trinity as well is it has the first female provost, which is the president, who was elected. So it's quite a different system than the other universities. Trinity the staff elect the president rather than an interview process. So there's lots of different processes that are tied up to Oxford and Cambridge, because we're seen to be there almost twinning with those two universities. So it's very different. It's very Inspector Morse.
It's a yes. That's the impression I get of Trinity. I just said if I ever went back and had the insane idea of doing a second PhD, it probably would be Trinity. But, you know, it's just one of these places that I've always, but like that, Dublin always seemed to intimidate me size-wise as well, even though I was born in London.
Okay, so
brought up in Limerick. Mom, again, couldn't, like you, she loved London, the people, but she had enough after a few years and had to come back to Ireland, back to her small community here in Limerick, who everyone knew everyone. And, you know, that can have its disadvantages as well. But I suppose, Amanda, you work with the elderly, and I suppose it's never more important than it is in these unprecedented times with COVID and lockdown. And I know from one of my colleagues he in the station, whose mother was 91 and died in a nursing home during lockdown, not of COVID, but died of Alzheimer's. And the only voice she knew at all in the world was one of her sons, Billy. And she wasn't allowed that comfort of having Billy in the room. They weren't allowed to come to the window or anything in that particular nursing home. And I thought personally it was cruel, because she was deprived of everything that keeps a person alive. People I've interviewed, survivors of genocide that I've interviewed, all of them say the one thing that kept them alive throughout, say, the Holocaust was hope. The hope that life was going to be, or faith, not even in a God, but in life getting better. And when that's taken from you, Amanda, it's very hard to come back from it. And I feel a lot of people just gave up because they thought they were never going to see their families again. Did you experience that?
Well, we interviewed 20 older people in particularly in Dublin. And yeah, we would have found that there were mental health issues which were emerging, and also physical health decline. And of course, the social element of that. I think that obviously people in community were probably in a more liberal perspective. If you're in a nursing home, you know, you don't have the choice of going out of it to visit your family. And some of the older people, you know, spoke of how they would connect with their families. So there was a high use of, you know, telephone, which they were used to, but also they acquired new skills like Zoom and FaceTime and things like that, which did help. But they would have talked about missing milestones, particularly of grandchildren. You know, one of them talked about missing you know, she hadn't seen her newborn first grandchild, and that was difficult. And somebody else talked about how her husband had died in a nursing home and she didn't get to see him before he died, because he died in such a short period of time, and he had dementia, living with dementia as well. So they're kind of very difficult stories that people are living through. But there was people were stoic and they understood why. And there was a fear, excuse me, there was a fear of getting the virus, and that really dictated, you know, we need to mind ourselves and protect ourselves. So, you know, what we found was they spoke of the home as a sort of place of protection, that they were safe, but also they spoke of it as a prison because they couldn't.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Amanda, because as I say, I interviewed a woman, Mariam Ibrahim, who was sentenced to death in Somalia with her baby. She was pregnant and she had her other baby with her. All of them were imprisoned. And she said that knowing, or her deep faith was what actually got her through, having that unbreakable faith. And it was because of her faith she was being executed. But having that, she said that was the one thing that she knew, that if she died, that there was a God there that she was going to. Other people who don't have a faith in a God felt that, oh, you know, I'm going to be a teacher, or I'm going to be this, or going to be that. And I suppose the most high profile of them was Anne Frank, who always believed till the very end that people were good and that things were going to get better. However, as I say, I think when people just died during COVID who had lost all sense of hope, because the place that they were in, that they were looking at as a home, has now become a prison for many of them. And
yes. And you know, the exacerbation of that is that, I mean, COVID-19 is unprecedented in all our lifetimes. The last similar pandemic was the Spanish flu, which killed 500 million people, and that was 1918 to 1920.
yeah,
So none of us remember anything like this, although, you know, you would have heard on the news about SARS over in China,
yeah,
and epidemics rather than pandemics. So we've really had no experience of this. And all of the government guidelines on that are trying to contain it.
yeah,
But also this reopening of society is really an experiment, because it's sort of allowing more and seeing what the response is. Do we need to come back again? And the vaccinations have been a huge breakthrough to people, but the boosters, I was reading, they're proposed to have 3 years, convey 3 years immunity, which is brilliant. So they are a gateway, but it doesn't mean obviously that you don't get COVID. It just means that you're protected and that you have the antibodies and that it won't affect you as severely. And for older people, just I don't know whether it got very much media coverage, but all of us should be on vitamin D supplements, because in Ireland we don't get that much sun, and sun is required for that. So vitamin D has a role in terms of protecting you from infections in any event. So all older people should have a daily dose of vitamin D and talk to the pharmacist about the dose.
But you see, Amanda, that's what the media has been talking quite excessively about, say, the COVID vaccine, as you say, to the detriment of other medications that one can be taking or should be taking, such as, you know, vitamins and the benefits of vitamins. We're never spoken about on the media. It's never been spoken about. And I don't think I've heard them talk about vitamin D supplements or anything like that, other than COVID. And it just seems that at times when you've been talked at so often about one subject, you end up, it just goes over your head, because you think, oh God, it's on, so I switch it over again. And I feel desperately sorry for people who are afraid to take the vaccine, or people who cannot take the vaccine for some reason. I just feel, especially if you're in the elderly category, you're doubly isolated, because you're treated almost like a pariah if you can't or won't, or you're afraid of.
Well, if you look at the statistics for Ireland, I think in the over 85s, there's 100% coverage. All older people have. So there's been really, really high uptakes in the over 65 age group, because I think that what has come across in the media is it does affect older people and people who are medically compromised. And it affects older people because as you get older, your respiratory systems don't work as well, and neither does your immune system. So you're more susceptible. Mm-hmm. And the government guidelines is really about suppressing spread, and trying to contain it in many ways. And it's had a whole society impact. And interestingly, all of the studies on mental health would show that the biggest impact has actually been in the 18 to 35 years of age. Older people have managed better because they're used to living in their homes. They're used to having their daily lives, and for some of them, their life hasn't really changed that much. Because, you know, they may have had chronic illnesses which prevented them going out in any event, but that doesn't negate the need for social connection. And that. So it is difficult. And in Ireland, we have from March to March, 87% of the deaths were over 65. And in America, it was 8 out of 10 of the deaths between that time period, and in the UK it was 9 out of 10 deaths were over 65. That shows you the vulnerability of that age group.
What have you felt, you know, what was the most, I suppose, outstanding thing that you noticed with when you were interviewing the elderly about lockdown? What was the overarching, I suppose, thing that most of them missed? Was it the physical contact?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
it was definitely physical contact. Going and spontaneity of being able to get into your car and go someplace or go on holidays or have family visit, and
And loss of control.
well, I mean, the people we interviewed were not very ill or anything, so they did
Yeah.
have a lot of control. But some of them, they become reliant on other people to do their shopping or things like
That's
that.
what I mean. That's what
Yeah.
I mean when you have your independence is taken from you.
Yes, and you really have to think about your daily lives. They were planning if they wanted to go out, that they would go out late at night when there was less people there, or being
That's
very
shocking.
avoidant. Yeah. So, and there was some conversation about young people going out, and then the numbers jumping up where they might have been out having a few drinks, and they're they just forgot about the precautions.
Yeah.
And numbers were jumping, and they were saying, well, we're still at home and we're still trying to do our best. But they understood and they were very stoic about it.
But the older age group are more stoic, I think, because they've come through harder times than anyone, say, from anyone from 60 downwards have had a much greater freedom in their lives. I mean, you look at the 80-year-olds, the chances are they were children during the war or the emergency here in Ireland. So they were used to going through difficult times and taking the rough with the smooth. So they were more prepared. I think I found it personally easier than most because I'm an only child of an only child. So you're always able to find something to occupy yourself. So we found Zoom as a way of doing our shows, or I found Zoom. But not everybody is self-contained and can find ways to occupy them. Some people desperately need another person to talk to, and I like talking to people, but I also like my own space. So that suit, people like me, only children, or people who like their own company or don't mind it, are can get through this. But I think people who are used to having a big family or coming from a big family and suddenly they're in a nursing home or they're at home during the day and people are afraid to call to them. It's almost like we've become germs that we're just by our very presence, we're a danger to society. And that in itself can play on a person's mind.
Oh, it certainly can. And, we know a little bit more about COVID now, but the frightening thing about it is that, people can be carrying it and have no symptoms. Mm. So you don't know, even the person that seems well and is reporting to be well could actually be a carrier. And you mentioned nursing homes. We're finishing another study looking at how directors of nursing managed in the pandemic. And a lot of the research would show that the issue was that you had people who had no symptoms and they might have been visiting or they might have been caring. And one resident gets infected, that some of the studies show that if there's one infected, that's just the detection. Probably 50 to 60% of the other residents are already infected. So the thing about COVID is that there's that kind of period of time where someone could not be pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic. So it spreads really through stealth. And that's been very difficult to control. Because
do you think it is something that can be controlled, Amanda? I mean, is it something that we're going to, it's probably a hypothesis, but is it something that at the end of the day, we're just going to have to live with and get on with and take precautions, wash hands, as hygiene, up hygiene and things like that. I mean, when I'm just speaking, I suppose being devil's advocate, when is enough for people? I mean, when you see families and the only time they can see their loved one in a nursing home is at the end of their life, just before they die, they can all pile in and see their family member. But when they're living, they can't see them. And you're saying to yourself, you know, that's living hell for the person in a hospital. I think I'd rather be dead than personally than be inside in a home every day of the week, being protected from the people that I love. You know,
I mean,
it's just, I'm
there
just
happened,
talking about the, you know, I'm just putting the voice, another voice, you know.
I mean, we've had pandemics before, and this, I'm sorry to say, is probably not the last pandemic we're going to have.
Yeah.
And COVID-19 is probably the eighth or ninth COVID-related virus that has passed from animals to humans. So it's there. The problem is that the virus can mutate, and it's like a lock and key. So if you see the immunization or vaccination as the key to giving immunity, what can happen in mutation is that that key doesn't fit as well with mutations. So it could mutate where the vaccine doesn't work very well. And you'll hear people talking about efficacy, which is how well it works. So that's one thing. So that's why if there's a new variant that pops up, people are really focused on whether the vaccine still can work with that. And at the moment, we're some of those variants, the immunization is not as effective, but it's still doing something. If we're looking at COVID in the long term, it depends on how we can stop it in its tracks. So, I mean, if you were very theoretical about it, what you would do is you'd get everybody in the world to stay in their house for 10 days. And they wouldn't spread it. And it would die out because they wouldn't get another host. But that's just not feasible. And we can see other countries that are back to normal and are doing it. So it will happen. But the problem is that experiment is the reopening of society on the 22nd of October. We're now seeing the consequences of rising numbers.
Well, can I just ask you, you just pointed out, it's made a very good, valid point there. And as something I've been saying for a long time on this show, why did our government not lock down the entire country and say, you know, stay in your homes for 10 days? People would have willingly done that if they had an end goal. And it was said, like, even 3 weeks, 4 weeks in your home, and then everything will be normal. Lock down the airports, lock down the ferries, and allow no one in or out. At one stage, we were all locked down here, Amanda, in our homes, and only told go 2 kilometers. And yet 20,000 flights came in on one particular day to Dublin Airport, according to the head of the airport authority. 20,000, not flights, 20,000 passengers. And you're saying to yourself, they were told, when you get to your destination, stay in it for 10 days. Now, what are the chances that someone who's come on a 10-day holiday to Ireland is going to spend those 10 days in their hotel room? They're not. And yet the rest of the country was in lockdown or not allowed more than 2 kilometers. If they had just closed everything down and made a hard lockdown for even a month, you would have said, well, that's grand now. After the month, you would imagine it would have died down or died out.
Yeah,
that's
I mean,
me, not uneducated on that, but I would imagine.
I mean, it wouldn't be possible to have everybody stay at home, because what would happen in hospitals, for example?
Well, I mean,
and essential services. So that would be the first thing. Also, you know, we're seeing the mental health consequences of the restrictions that we have had, which were not, you know, you can't go outside your door. And we've also seen the difficulties in terms of other countries who have been harsher affected. So, you know, in places like Italy and Spain, who had very high rates at a period of time, they had the army roaming, you know, who are you and why are you out? So I think all of those decisions are balancing a number of variables, and it is about the protection of the population versus the unintended consequences of those restrictions, like mental health issues, like even human right of liberty. So, I mean,
And that's a huge deficit, the human right of liberty. That's a very important point, Amanda. I mean, I live in Limerick. It's got a huge suicide rate. And since COVID lockdown, the amount of people who have actually taken their own lives is just, and I'm like, this show is associated, as you know, with the Samaritans and that, and I have Limerick Suicide Watch coming on next Wednesday on the show to talk about it. But mental health would be something that would be very important, animal rights and mental health, and children, and it's all related, and I've spoken, I suppose, on a few shows about the dangers of people when you hear this phrase, stay home, stay safe. But Amanda, what if the home is the least safe place that have, and you've done a lot of work on abuse, and what if your abuser you're forced to live in the same space with your abuser 24/7, and you can't get to a phone, you can't get help, and I don't think those things were thought out at all. And that phrase, when it comes up, stay home, stay safe, really gets to me when I think of people on the street who don't have the luxury of a home, or people in a hotel.
Yes. I mean, I suppose the first thing to point out is that was happening even before COVID, that people were living with people who were their perpetrators. What COVID did, it exacerbated it.
Yeah.
See that sort of friction through the Central Statistics Office, people's quality of life surveys, things like that, the calls to the Rape Crisis Centre, to Women's Aid, the safeguarding service. Unfortunately, a lot of the staff were redeployed in the adult safeguarding service, so that cases were left there. We didn't come across any, in our research, we didn't come across any incidences of abuse. However, internationally, other studies have shown it has increased between 100 to 200%.
I can imagine, Amanda, I can imagine. I mean,
there are things like, older people, they have a right to make their own decisions. And one thing that is not commonly known is this idea of next of kin. So a next of kin has no legal standing. They can't make decisions for somebody else. So the only reason that you should be taking next of kin is that you're saying, this is the person I want to be called if there's emergency. That's the only way you can make decisions for somebody else is if you have power of attorney, and that is granted by somebody with capacity, or you might have heard of wardship.
Yes, we've heard about it, especially in the United States with that singer Britney Spears.
Yes, they have, it's more of a guardianship. It's similar, but it's guardianship. But wardship is from legislation that is called the Lunacy Regulation Act of 1871.
Wow.
And that was replaced in 2015 by the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, which is not fully implemented. So wardship will be gone in another, I think, June 2022. It should be completely disbanded. So everybody will have this more person-centered legislation that they go under. And what people should realize is we all should be making advanced care plans, even if you're well, because we don't know whether you go out and you'll be run over and you won't be able to make your decisions. So you can put down what I would like to happen if I don't have a decision. And that's the gold standard. Also, you can have a power of attorney where somebody does have decision making and you decide that you want to have somebody else, say, manage your finances or make some decisions for you. And that's common law power of attorney. If you lose capacity, it stops. But you can also get enduring power of attorney. And in that context, the powers you've given somebody else, they go beyond that. So they can still make those decisions. And then if you have an issue with your ability to make decisions, or it's going to happen in the future. So people who are early diagnosed with dementia, you can have this facility under the new act where you can nominate an assisted decision maker, a co-decision maker. And if you don't have capacity through the courts, a representative decision maker can be appointed. So I think older people really should always think families, you can talk to them, but ultimately the decision is yours. You shouldn't be swayed by the doctor saying you're not able to manage at home. It's your decision where you live. It's your decision whether you want to wear tights on your head. It's
But yes, but when you were talking there, Amanda, I was thinking of a case in England where in the early stages of COVID, where a grandmother was in a nursing home and her daughter and her granddaughter got so upset that their grandmother was in a nursing home that they actually went into the nursing home and took their mother and grandmother out, got her into the car and wanted to bring her home to look after her at home. And the police stopped them and took the mother back again and said, no, she had to go back to the nursing home. She was in the care of the nursing home and they were responsible for her. And I just thought that's way too much control. I would hate that. I mean, if your family feel that, well, we can keep her at home with us and we can protect her. On the other hand, I'm thinking, as you were talking, what happens? I'm sure you've met situations where parents or where the elderly have been, we'll say, overprotected or prevented from doing what they wanted to do by what maybe well-meaning daughters and sons, or controlling daughters and sons who are saying you are not going out, you're staying in, and locking them in when they're otherwise healthy and able to go out and get fresh air. Fresh air, one would think, would be the most important thing. And I think people in nursing homes, a lot, I'm not qualified to say this, but it's just an opinion. I feel that a lot of people in nursing homes died because of no physical contact with their family and no fresh air. They were indoors all the time. And you talk about vitamin D, the importance of vitamin D. If you're not getting it from the air, you have to be getting it somewhere. And if you're not getting it, then you're going to die, one would think.
Well, I mean, I went back for a period of time and volunteered in nursing homes early in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I have to say that the nursing home I was in had COVID-19 outbreaks.
Okay.
And, the people that were dying were the people with COVID-19, and it's a most horrible death. It really is very horrible. And it was lonely. And this nursing home did facilitate family in, but it was one family member. That's all.
Yeah.
Because they have to balance, what if somebody comes in and passes the virus on? So we know that's how personal contact is how it's happened. So it is a balancing act. The unintended consequences is that loneliness. A lot of them bought, iPads to try and have some human contact, and there were window visits and things like that. But I understand the frustrations both of families and of older people. Just about the case in the UK, I mean, I don't know that case, but if incapacity was an issue, there may have been concerns about the family bringing that person home, or there may have been some sort of, their legislation is slightly different. They work on the basis of best interests, where we work on will, preference, values and beliefs. So, I mean, it could be that woman didn't want to go home. So, you really, all we're seeing is the veneer of that, which may present it as...
It just seemed frightening. The police would come and say, no, you can't take your mother home. She is in the care of the hospital or the nursing home. And there
may have been, there may have been a wardship-like situation where the hospital actually had wardship. But we had a similar situation, the AC case down with the University Hospital Cork about 2 years ago, where the constitutional right of that lady, the hospital wanted her to go to be admitted to residential care, and she was living with dementia. So these things are really not always black and white, and you have to look very carefully into them, and you have to really take a rights-based approach. And what is the best for this individual that matches their own decisions and rights and values and things like that, not what the family think. And not, so all of that is really interesting. And there's a lot of in the UK they have, well, in England they have what's called courts of protection that look at these, and really interesting commentaries, about cases of abuse where the judges have said, you have to remember, you might do everything by the book, but if you avoid the element of happiness in this person's life, then you're doing it all wrong. And that we're here to be their servant, not their master.
Yeah. Yeah. And but this is it. You're looking at people who are 80 and 90 years of age, and you're saying to them yourself, you're trying to weigh up the difference, between their health and their mental health. And you're saying there's a very thin line between grand, I'm healthy, I'm here in a bubble, I'm wrapped up in a bubble now, I'm not going to get sick, but I'm not allowed to see the people I love, the grandchildren, the new great grandchild that's after being born. And I can look at them outside the window. And it's, you're just saying to yourself, where is the mental health aspect of all of this? To be lost in this vortex of trying to save a person's physical health and not thinking about what's it doing to their mental health, at 19 years of age.
And I mean, there was a huge burden on staff in terms of trying to compensate for that. But if you're looking after people in a congregated setting, like a nursing home, letting an individual in, you might say, well, the older person wants that person to come in. And if you think that my mother shares the bed in the same room with this person, and their visitor comes in and infects that person, who infects my mother, who goes on and affects other people. So you have to kind of, it's a balancing the right to protection in terms of their health being protected from physical harm, which could kill them because COVID-19, and also that community, there'll be an outbreak where a number of other residents, and how can we facilitate their mental health issues? And a lot of nursing homes, they built these little rooms that there was perspex, and they had lots of ways,
I know, I know they did. I know the nursing homes and the nurses and the doctors and the carers were doing their absolute best. But it's back to the thing, Amanda, of the physical connection, the feeling that you have autonomy of your own life. Now, I can understand that people have to be protected and all that, but certainly in some nursing homes, and I've heard people saying it, and people have said it here on the show, and have said it on shows like Joe Duffy and that they were vaccinated and they couldn't go in and see their parents, but nurses and doctors in the early stages were coming, and they'd go out to their families, and they'd go home at the end of the night, and they'd come in, and you're saying, well, if a person is inside in a nursing home, an elderly person, and they're not allowed any visitors, where is the virus coming from? It's coming from somebody that's bringing it in. Perhaps we should have had a situation where, for back to what you said earlier, lockdown, everything, have nurses and doctors. In London, they were supposed to be building this big hospital, kind of a war type hospital, where the nurses and the doctors would stay and go at night, and they'd have their beds and whatever, or they'd stay in hotels that they were all going to be in that hotel and back, and there wasn't that if you like, potential for contamination. And you're saying, how did people die of COVID if they weren't allowed to have visitors? Only that the people that were before people were being vaccinated, the people that were caring for them weren't always vaccinated, and were coming and going about their lives, going for their groceries, coming in, and they're entitled to. Nobody's saying that they're not entitled to. God knows, but I've had people on who have said, but I wasn't allowed in, and I had the vaccine, but yet.
Yeah, but I just think, just to be clear, the vaccine doesn't mean that you can't carry the virus.
No, I understand that.
Simply means that your immune system is in a better place to respond to it.
Yeah.
So it is about numbers. The more people that you expose to individuals in nursing homes, the higher risk it is that it'll be passed.
Yeah.
So just because I have the vaccine, doesn't mean that I wouldn't get COVID.
Yeah.
And equally, these people had to be cared for by the staff. So,
yeah,
you could have the scenario where they had in Spain, where all the staff abandoned a nursing home. They just
really
didn't come into work. So again, it goes back to that balance: is how do we reduce risk? And you reduce risk by reducing exposure.
Yes, so, I understand what I do understand what you're saying. So, I do understand that the London idea of having that one big hospital that would have catered for all of the sick and have all of the nurses and doctors living and working there until a certain length of time, until the vaccine had died out or the virus had died out.
Yeah, that, as far as I know, that didn't happen in any country in the world. And you also have a whole political arguments from the UK in terms of leadership in the pandemic, which have been heavily criticised by many commentators, both in their own country and internationally, about the management of COVID-19. And you look to countries like New Zealand and you look to Australia. Australia have just lifted their entry in the last couple of weeks. And, there's this idea of herd immunity, that you just let it rip through the population. If you do that, your death rates are high, but everybody's going to get natural immunity. Their own bodies.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you next about herd immunity.
Yeah, so, herd immunity just means that you've been exposed to it and you've recovered. But what happens when you recover is those antibodies that are specific to your response, which is specific to that virus, it can be reignited if you're exposed again. And you may become sick, but not as sick. So the vaccinations are really a way of developing that immune response by almost having the body think that it's being attacked by the virus, produces those response systems in the immune, which come if you come in contact with the full-blown virus. So, the vaccinations are a control method, but they're not the end
cure.
Of,
they're not a cure. They're not. And from my limited knowledge of it, you can be vaccinated and still pass on the virus to somebody. So you're kind of, you're meeting people as well who are saying, well, why should it be, if the vaccine, if I can pass on the virus after taking the vaccine and I can get the virus after taking the vaccine, why should I inject myself with something that I don't know what is being injected into me or what reaction I'm going to get from it? Because one is hearing a lot of reactions that aren't being talked about in the media, and one wishes that they were, that there was a kind of a more of a robust, and I hate that phrase, it's been used over and over in the media, robust, but that there was a robust discussion, even like we're having now here, a kind of a not a discussion where both are on the same line. I'm asking questions that others might ask. I'm being the devil's advocate. I don't really see the devil's advocate being played very much in media, that maybe more people would have taken up the vaccine if they had heard, well, I agree with him, or I agree with her, or I don't agree with him. But you're not seeing that the alternate voice so much. And I don't understand why, because if you listen to Loose Women and they're talking about HRT and they're talking about the effect HRT had on me, and I had this reaction and I had that reaction, I was very depressed, or I was fine, or there's no discussion about the effect of how the vaccine affected me or how it affected you. And people are scared because they're not hearing, how am I potentially going to be affected by taking this vaccine?
The first thing I would say, that all of the vaccines that are there have gone through rigorous phases of testing. So they have tested it on animals first, they've tested it on humans. And for anything, there's risk in anything. But what has been demonstrated is if you were to catch the virus without a vaccination, the likelihood is you will be sicker for longer and you could die. And if you take the vaccination, you may have a side effect that might be as mild as a sore shoulder for a couple of days, or you might feel fatigued or whatever. But that they're seen to be temporary. Now, there was in the media about 6 months ago about this idea of blood clotting.
Yes,
with people, and that was investigated. And temporarily, some of those vaccinations were stopped. But they were reintroduced because what happens is there's this statistical analysis to show, is that significant in the whole population? So if you have significant tests done, so if you're going to vaccinate 1 million people and that 100 have some form of reaction, but that you have actually protected all of the rest of the people, then that would be deemed as that 100 in the context of the wider number, that the risk is worth it because you are giving somebody a vaccination that would protect them, that if they didn't get, you might find that there are 10,000 who die. So all of this has been researched, and you have to remember that it had to happen over a hugely short time. Never in the history have vaccinations occurred before, and we're used to them. I mean, people get vaccinated for measles, mumps, rubella.
Oh yeah, I mean, I
polio.
had my measles, mumps, and rubella, and I got polio vaccine in the UK before it came out here.
And
in Ireland.
A lot of your listeners may remember, the 60s, TB was rampant.
Yeah, it was.
And people died from it. Polio, there were lifelong consequences for that for people. So, I mean, polio is completely eradicated. But if we didn't have a vaccination,
but what do you say to people who will say, well, but the difference between the polio vaccine and the MMRs and those vaccines, the difference between those is that they were fully tested, they were on the market for a long time. The vaccine that is there now is still not. It's still on a trial until 2022. If I'm correct.
A lot of those vaccinations were developed in the 60s. The equipment, the knowledge we have is hugely accelerated there. So they didn't jump any steps, because to get the vaccines accepted by the pharmaceutical regulators, they still had to go through all the same hoops. And it would be that maybe if you were doing it in a normal fashion, that you might have had to wait to have those phases done, for the regulator to look at them. But here they were given a pass, which accelerated the time. So, the Oxford University have published extensively, and they're still doing tests in terms of the vaccination. And there's a monitor if there's any. So when you go to get the vaccination, you would have been told that, you may have a sore arm afterwards. You may feel fatigued for a few days. And also, if you're feeling worse, go to a doctor to be reviewed. So all of those side effects that are over what is expected are generally recorded, and then they're investigated again. So there is a monitoring. It's not just, we give this to the population. There is a monitoring. Yeah,
it's just the general public is never really. There just seems to be I'm speaking as just a normal everyday person in this situation now. You're looking and you're saying, well, where is the discussion about the reaction I had and the reaction I had and the reaction I had? And you're just being bombarded with it on social media and things like that, but never on the TV. And you're saying to yourself, if I was able to watch a program where people came on and said, and then that you had a doctor explaining why that happened, or that you were potentially one of the unlucky people to have that, to maybe have Bell's palsy or whatever, or a clot, or all of the things you hear people talking about on social media that they got after it. And you're saying, Jesus, I mean, as somebody whose father died of a clot, and clots are in my family, you're kind of saying to yourself, and you're worried. And and there's people out there with underlying conditions or with family histories that they're saying, Jesus, is this worth taking this and taking the chance? I could be the unlucky one. You're petrified. And that goes back then to mental health.
It does, but I mean, the vaccine is not mandated. We're not forced to take it.
But you're not allowed in anywhere.
Well, I mean, that's protecting other people. If because of the characteristics of COVID-19.
Yeah.
The restrictions mean that you have to look at the health of the community. So the restrictions are based on protecting a population.
Yeah.
And if you, as an individual, make a choice that you don't want the vaccination, then you also have to accept that there will be restrictions that are over and above, and there so that protects other people. And I mean, wearing of masks is not about protecting ourselves; it's about protecting people we come in contact with, because people have to wear the mask properly. There's no point in having a mask that's down here because you breathe through your nose.
You're constantly seeing people walking the streets and masks under their nose, and you're saying, why?
So it's not something that is mandated. People get a choice to do it, and if you don't, the consequences of that is, it's like any sort of treatment. If you say, I don't want to be treated for this, then there are consequences. Your condition will probably get worse. So I think.
What was I going to say? Was this always an area of research, geriatrics, that you wanted, or did you just accidentally happen on it? Because it's a tough area. People think, when, as I told you before we started, I have a cousin who's a geriatrician, and when we heard he was doing it, we always thought he'd study cancer research or something like that when he graduated as a doctor. But no, geriatrics. And we had to look it up. We were kind of like, what? Geriatrician, what is he? He's going for the title, geriatrician, but it was actually, it's a minefield, because you're dealing with, as we have been talking about, the psychological effects that happen when you're elderly, dementia, the breakdown, I suppose, of the body in many areas that you wouldn't experience in other areas of medicine, I'm sure.
Well, I suppose my interest stems from my father was a lot older than my mother, and he had dementia when I was 12.
Oh no!
So I mean, I would have looked after him from all of that time, because a lot of my siblings would have left. I was the youngest. And I can remember when I was about 15 going up to see him in the hospital. And at that time, the way to treat what we call is, it used to be called the wandering behaviours, but they're called responsive behaviours now, is that he was tied like a straitjacket to the bed. And I think that's my interest in safeguarding, because I couldn't understand why you would do that to a human being. And I was, I was 15. So I kind of went into nursing, and my safeguarding was reignited as a public health nurse. I was going into people's houses where you might have an older person. One older person was confined to her room in a house. So she was living with her son and family. She couldn't leave the room. And also she had in the fridge her own milk. She couldn't touch the other milk there. So that to me was completely crazy. And things like financial abuse, that, people feel entitled to take money because I'm going to get it in the will anyway. Well, you're not entitled to it. And there's still huge instances, episodes of that still happening. And we did a study in UCD in 2010 on abuse, and financial abuse was the most common form of abuse.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
So there's lots of areas, and I suppose I'm interested in older people and their human flourishing, about making their lives the best. We have life expectancy that is, increased over the last 50 years hugely in Ireland. but it's also about increasing quality of life.
This is what I've been, yeah, this is at the heart of what I was saying. How much is a person's mental health as important, if not more important, than their physical? Because if you're mentally good, a friend of mine now yesterday told me she's in hospital. She has had surgery, but mentally I'm perfect. She said, I'm in great spirits. And I thought, well, you're going to get physically, you're going to get better because you're mentally good. But
Yeah.
people who just lose all sense of hope.
Yes, I mean, it is, it's catch-22. If you have poor mental health, you may end up with poor physical health, because with depression, you can stop eating, you stop engaging, and you mightn't be able to sleep, things like that, and that affects your physical health. And then we know also for physical health, if that declines, there's a lot of comorbidity, and that's where things are happening together, that people get depression. So people who are diagnosed, say, with chronic illnesses that are progressive, like dementia, they may also have depression, because they're depressed that they have something that can't be cured. And even people getting older, you look back and you say, I'm not able to do the same things I used to do, or the things that I would like to do. And that can be depressing for people, because, you want to be able to sustain the same abilities. And when you see them decline, that's, it's very sad to yourself and others, but it can lead to depression. So it's a catch-22. Physical decline can lead to mental health.
But it's also a transgenerational condition, I would imagine. People don't, people think, oh, someone with dementia, it's just happening to them. They're in their own world. You're watching the slow death of your loved one, your parent, long before they die. In your case, your father.
I suppose we have to remember that the person is still there, even though they may appear that
still there.
And there's really interesting research by a lady called Naomi Phelan in the United States, where she does work with people with dementia, and things like using music. So you can have somebody who's non-verbal, not able to talk. You put on some music that they're familiar with, and their eyes light up. They might start moving, and that's how you get the connection.
And Irish dancing. All of that. Team competition, team dancing, 8 hands, 4 hands. They can remember the formation. Yes. And it keeps the brain functioning, because you're using, I suppose, a mathematical 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And,
exactly.
The formation, I've read about how dance is being used in certain countries too.
It is. And for people with dementia, you've things like doll therapy. Animal therapy, laughter therapy. There's all these different things that will enable.
Isn't it amazing, though? Isn't it amazing that that Pat said to me his mother could remember all the songs, and she could sing quite happily all the country music songs, but know who he was.
That's what happens in dementia is your short-term memory is disrupted, and there's a good description. That it's like a bookcase.
Yeah.
So if you take the books in the bookcase as being your memories, what dementia does, it shakes the bookcase, and the top books are your short-term memory. They fall out.
Yeah.
But the bottom books are there. So that's what I relate to. So you might say, I'm your wife, and that individual says, no, you're not, because they're remembering marrying somebody who's young. And they're remembering, now I'm looking at somebody who is like 70. So it's the short-term memory. And some people say, oh, it's very difficult. They're asking the question again and again. That's because that short-term memory for that person, they've genuinely not remembered, and they're asking again. So it might be, what time is it? Or who are you? Or whatever. And for people in that state, you shouldn't try and bring them back and orientate them to reality, because that can become distressful.
Yeah.
So just try
go along with them.
Go along. And if there's hallucinations, just try and make it safe. So it can happen in some forms of dementia that someone might think I'm delirium. There's spiders going up the curtains. So the way to answer that is, I'll shake the curtains and they'll come out and reduce the fear. So yeah, it is, dementia is an awful disease. It's awful for the person when they're diagnosed because they realize what's going to happen.
So what's the difference, do you think, between Alzheimer's and dementia? Is it age or is it?
No. Dementia is really an umbrella category. It's where you've many different types of dementia. So it's like that. It's the umbrella, and the spokes are things like Alzheimer's, mixed dementias, and different types of dementia. So you can have, for example, dementia as a result of alcoholism. You can have dementia as a consequence of Parkinson's disease, dementia. So they're all different types, but the ones we're more familiar with are really the Alzheimer's type of dementia because it's the most common, and also the mixed dementia where you have dementia of two different types occurring. And the symptoms really match what type of dementia you have. So you might have some people who have hallucinations, or you have some people who have different sort of symptoms that are arising. And it's really the part of the brain that is affected. And that brain would be in charge of that, say, voice recognition, language, or things like that. So that dementia on itself is really the umbrella term. But if you look at a particular diagnosis, it's generally will identify it's Alzheimer's or something like that.
Okay, I was always wondering why. It was one thing I didn't understand. You know, some people say, "Oh, my mother suffers from dementia," and I'm thinking, is that, you know, just forgetfulness in the sense of, and how it differs from full-blown Alzheimer's, you know? And you know, can you see any light at the end of the tunnel with regards to research in the area of Alzheimer's? Because it's a dreadful disease, particularly for the family and for people watching, as you say, you with your dad, a loved one slowly regressing.
I mean, it's where we are at the moment is really that there are supportive therapies there. There is no cure for dementia at the moment, and there's research going on, but we can support someone to live a really meaningful life through these therapies and enabling them to connect and communicate. And it's important to, you know, if you're a caregiver, that you understand what is happening, because it's very frustrating if you don't understand. And it's important we use language that doesn't isolate or marginalize people, or we don't use things like, you know, they've lost themselves. They're still there. It's just that the connection is very fragile because their ability to connect is maybe through a different method like song or various therapies. But we should never think of dementia as like a death in the person, because that person is still there, and that really reduces their experience of personhood, that we're valuing them as an equal person.
Yeah, I heard somebody one time being asked, an elderly man was asked, "Why do you keep going to the hospital to visit your wife? She doesn't know you." And it was the most profound answer when he replied, "But I know her." And that's the most important thing. And also when I look at, when I was doing my own PhD and I was interviewing Professor Micheál O'Shea, he was in Trinity as well, and his wife was in a nursing home, and he used to go every single day, 4 or 5 times a day on a bicycle to visit her in the nursing home. And he was saying the same thing to me, you know, I just enjoy being with her every moment of the day. And he said, my greatest moments are the moments I'm getting on the bike, knowing I'm going to be seeing my wife. It doesn't matter that she's not well, that she's in hospital, in a nursing home or whatever, I'm getting to see her. And I think that that's very important to people.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we need to look at it also on, you know, children with intellectual disability, people with intellectual disability are, you know, children with autism. It is about, they have a right to live equal lives. And it's just that we need to think about facilitating that and ensuring equity. that they have equal chances and equal rights. And that's also so for people who are living with dementia, that they don't lose their rights. And
Yeah.
it's really our job to ensure that they're protected, facilitated, and enabled.
It's so what is next for you in your work? What are you focusing on at the moment? Are you doing more research?
Yeah, I've a couple of research projects. So one of them, which we hope to be finishing up, first is research looking at directories of nurses, their experiences in managing COVID-19 in the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm currently just finishing the latter part of that report. And we're also collecting data looking at caregivers' experiences of caring in pandemic. So that's with Family Carers Ireland. And then I'm also working with the WHO on creating sort of what's called a mega map for elder abuse to look at what is the evidence base in terms of prevalence, incidence, interventions, things like that. So that keeps me busy.
For some people who are not sure when they see somebody, is somebody being overprotected or is somebody abusing an elder, what would you suggest are the signs for somebody to watch out for if they're just not sure, if they see an elderly person and their son or their daughter maybe preoccupied with their money, preoccupied with their bank account, with their pension, for instance, or whatever. That's all a form, in my idea of it, of elder abuse.
Yes.
Because they're captive in their own home and dependent on children.
Yes, and I mean, what's becoming increasingly in the whole kind of conversation about abuse is, the increasing importance of recognizing what we would call coercive control. So this idea that somebody else is controlling that person, and it could be due to undue influence. And within the elder abuse literature, things like saying, I won't bring my grandchildren to visit you unless you give me money. That's a form of abuse. And to look for the signs and symptoms is really to recognize the types of abuse, which are generally physical, sexual, financial, material, and psychological abuse.
Deprivation of food.
Yeah, and really keep thinking about that everybody has a right to manage their own decisions. They have a right to be heard. And if you use that rights-based approach, it will help kind of contextualize that you're not being sympathetic to, say, a caregiver who might be feeling that they're stressed due to caring. There's no excuse for perpetrating abuse of any type.
Yeah. Well, Amanda, you have been absolutely, I won't deny the fact that we had a power out in the middle of it, and you were just absolutely fantastic to come back on the show for the end of it for us to chat. I'm sure you have had a massively busy day with Zoom calls and everything, but you've been wonderful.
Well, thank you very much.
Background.
Yeah, that's Trinity in the background, you can see. It's been lovely to talk to you, and thank you.
It's been a delight having you on, and continued success with what is a very important area of research, the elderly and abuse, in particular with children and the elderly. It's just, they're very important areas of research, and huge luck for your future with it.
Thank you.
Shindera leis an clár. That's the end of the show for today. Until the next time. Le cúna day, bawallam tu galir, chiacana sonas agus grai, wish you peace, happiness and love agus gadei slán. Slán.